Hello, everyone. Can you hear me or see me? If you may unmute yourself for a moment and say hello to one another, so I can be sure that everyone is here and you can hear my voice.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
Brilliant. I see Raja. Hi, Raja. How are you?
Hello.
Sean, are you there?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So it seems that everyone can see me and hear me. So I will ask you now to mute yourself, and then as I am sharing my screen, I will not be able to at the same time see your faces if you want to say something. So please feel free to unmute yourself and speak when I create a moment to do that. So I will ask you many questions, and you're welcome to intervene when I ask questions and to say something. So please do that, as I cannot see you raising your hand as I will be sharing a presentation. So I starting to share it. 2, 1. Brilliant. It should be now being sharing. Can Sean tell me if you can see my screen?
I can see Jesus as the other, journaling images.
Brilliant. So everything is working. So that is the theme of the session of today. We will be talking about how over centuries Christians have thought about Jesus and represented him in art. This means, of course, that we'll begin with the ancient Roman world, with antiquity, with the Roman Empire. And I think that before going into this force long travel across history and across a few paintings that I selected, it would be good to start this talk by speaking about how we have begun thinking about this recently. What inspired me in doing this talk. And the inspiration came from comments from the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who said that we have represented Jesus for too long as a white man, and then said that Jesus wasn't white, and that we should think Jesus differently. This has started a debate among many art historians and commentators about whether what the Archbishop said was correct or not. And it is not my desire to wade into that debate. But what I would like to do is to enable all of us to reflect together with you about how we have thought about Jesus, what we have thought as the church through the centuries about Jesus and his representation, and then to join with you in a discussion about what we think about what we have seen and learned and reflected upon. So if that's all right, I will begin. So as I said before, and so I'm remaining with this first image, don't worry, there are more. As I said before, it all begins with the Roman Empire, as many things about Christianity. And the Roman Empire wasn't just Rome, but was a sort of encounter of two civilizations that in turn had absorbed many other. On one side, we have the Eastern Roman Empire, that is mainly Greek-speaking, and that is a mishmash of the many cultures that the Greeks had encountered in the Middle East, all absorbed and mixed together through the Greek language, Greek's forms of thinking, and that had created a sort of Hellenistic, I was called, Greek culture of the East. And this was the culture in which Jesus was born. This was the culture that would have been dominant in the upper and middle classes of Palestine at his time. This was the culture that you would have found if you traveled in Egypt, in Alexandria, or what you would have found in Athens if you were a young person that wanted to go to university and you came from Rome, from the West, say you were from Britain, like you are now. You would have maybe, if your family was rich enough, you would have traveled to Rome, and then you would have gone to study in Athens, where you would have found many different teachers, all teaching in Greek and all teaching you things from Greek culture and Greek civilization, whether it was philosophy, whether it was rhetoric, whether it was art. On the other side, you would have had legal studies very much imprinted on Latin-speaking Roman culture, and Roman culture was much more pragmatic and realistic. If you want to see a difference in between Greece and Rome, you may think of Rome like law and legal thinking, and Greece as philosophy and philosophical thinking. So you see this also in arts. Many of you are wondering, why are you banging on so much about this? And the reason is because in arts, this difference is quite marked. If you look at a Greek statue, you will see the Greek statues are very idealized figures. They are very beautiful, very proportioned, very young, and they want to represent an ideal, or what does it mean to be a human being. If you look at statues made by the Romans, many of you probably traveling or going to a museum or watching a documentary late in TV would have noticed that Roman emperors are looking quite like us. If they were overweight, they are made overweight. If they were in the 50s, they will have painted as people or sculpted as people in the 50s. If they were very thin, they will look thin. If they had a small or large nose, they will look exactly as they were. There will be little in the way of exaggeration in favor of idealism. If instead you look at how the Greeks made Alexander the Great, a great Greek emperor from Macedon, you will see that he instead would have looked very beautiful and idealized. Now, probably Alexander didn't look like the Greeks made him, but that's the point. That's the difference I'm trying to illustrate to you. On one side, Greek idealism and Greek figuration, and a way to paint figures, and on the other one, Roman realism. Of course, behind this, there is two very differences of what we see in arts. And do we see in arts something that returns to us the beauty, that tries to show us the beauty of things as they are, away from weakness? And so you, for example, may think of moving away from human beings, a work of art that is about a tree or a flower that is not decayed, but is beautiful and in bloom, and any blemish will go away. There is, in my view, virtue in that kind of art, because it shows you how perfectly things could look like in a world that wasn't fallen from a Christian perspective. Or instead, you disagree with me and you value another type of art that I must say I like too, that is an art that shows us as things are, as the things of the world are. And so actually you appreciate a portrait that shows as a person would have actually looked like, because instead of making you think about an ideal, it makes you think about how that person was. So I would make a slow pause before going into Jesus' figures and ask maybe a couple of you, first one, first served, which of the two views do you prefer? Do you prefer a realistic way of depicting things, or do you like art as idealism, a return of an idea? What do you think? Please unmute yourself and just feel free to intervene. Is anybody there?
Yes, I think I am. I think it depends. I think it depends on what the purpose of the art is deemed to be by the artist, really, as to whether I would prefer realism or not.
realism or not? And what do you mean with that? What do you prefer?
It depends on what the artist is aiming at, what I think the artist is aiming at. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, and I think that that's quite important. So how do we decide what's the artist aiming at? That's quite a good point. But you captured the point that I was trying to make. So there were two ways of which the artists were aiming at, either realism or idealism, if you want. So now I will move to the first figure that we see here. You can see the Good Shepherd. This is maybe the first painting that we ever had of Jesus. Probably was struck many of you that Jesus doesn't have a beard. Jesus looks quite a young man, and he's dressed as a Greek. That's not exactly how a Roman or a Palestinian would have been dressed, but you can see how, however, depicted is a story that we all know, the Good Shepherd. This painting is in the walls of the catacomb of St. Callistus in Rome from the 3rd century AD. And as you can see, Christians were not depicting Jesus in the way that they probably, how Jesus would have looked like. So what do you think they're trying to do? What do you think? Why do you think the first Christians weren't, the first generations, weren't trying to depict Jesus as he would have looked like? Why do you think they are depicting him like this? Any volunteer? What are the intentions, to quote someone a moment ago? Why do you think they are choosing to make him look in this way?
Hello?
Yes?
Can anyone hear me?
Yes, Derek?
Yeah. Right, are we two people speaking together or just one? Just one.
I think it's just you. I'm
Okay. Well, I keep thinking of the term Greco-Roman, where we've got everything all combined. In regard to your first question, everything is combined. Greco-Roman means classical, and classical tends to adhere to the Greek configurations, the statues and paintings and things, as opposed to the Roman one, which is more human, more like we are. And which do I prefer? I don't know. I can't distinguish between the two. But this figure you're showing now is very human. It's much more like us than any of the Greek statues, which are so good that when you see them on top of a building and go around the back of the building, the backs of the statues are actually just as perfect as the front of the statue. So that's idealism. That's classicism, pure classicism, as opposed to the human figures.
And what do you think of this Jesus? Do you think he would have looked like this? Or do you think that they are trying to do something different?
Wow. That's very difficult. I don't know. I've never seen the picture. First century AD, was it?
Third century AD.
First century AD, yeah. And
it's probably the first or the second painting that we have of Jesus. Probably the second. Later we'll show you an earlier one. But thank you for the point that you made. Is there anyone that would like to join on this picture? Do you think that Jesus would have looked like this?
Can I say something? It's Carol here. Yeah.
Yes.
I wonder whether they're trying to make Jesus look like contemporary for those people who would be seeing the carving or whatever it is, the painting.
Yes, the fresco. Yes.
Fresco.
Someone like them.
Yeah, someone like them. Which is what we try to do nowadays as well, isn't it? Sometimes.
It'll go in a minute.
Yes. So you think that he probably is looking like a Mediterranean person would have looked in Rome at the time?
Yeah.
Yes, possibly. Yes.
That's possible. I would note that, of course, you see that he's the Good Shepherd. Do any of you remember the story of the Good Shepherd?
Yeah.
So Jesus is presented as rescuing a lost sheep. And in a sense, I think that the way in which he's depicted is whoever's quite young in this image. And in Greece at the time and in Rome, there would have been many young gods that looked quite like him, like Adonis, that died quite young and that were worshipped as saviors. So there are some scholars that think that in this picture, what Christians are trying to do is to establish a sort of God that is familiar to the people of the time. Not so much that he would have looked necessarily like them, though I agree with Carol that probably he looks quite Mediterranean to me. He looks quite normal, average person you could meet on the street. But at the same time, they think that probably they were trying to do something else, or something more, partly telling a story with images, that is remembering people about the story of the Good Shepherd, and partly to set up a Jesus that says, yeah, you worship Adonis, but actually the real God is Jesus, and Adonis is a sort of copy of him, or is a reference to him. So some think that about Jesus. Let's leave this case with these questions, and then you can come back on it and ask me at the end, can you please go back to the Good Shepherd? I would like to say something about it. And move to the second image. This is from the 4th century, a little bit later, still in Rome, the catacombs of Commodia. All these images are in catacombs because, as many of you probably already know, the Christians worshipped in secret in tombs. Catacombs were underground systems of tombs because of the persecutions, both social and sometimes even not just social, but of state, of those practicing the Christian religion in the first 3 centuries up to 4 in certain parts of the Roman Empire, 4 centuries of Christianity. So is there a volunteer that hasn't spoken up to now, but otherwise you can, if no one speaks, please, those that have already spoken can speak, that would like to say how this Jesus looks like? How does he look different from the Jesus of before? Anyone?
Hello, it's Kathy. I don't particularly know either of them.
I can hear you very well. Could you come closer to your microphone?
Sorry, is that any better?
Yes, yes.
I don't think either of them would really look like the Jesus that I think of. One's represented as very much sort of Romanized, and this one is representative of the thing of a god. But I don't really think he probably had that sort of hair and a beard. But the rest of it, I always assumed that he's much more like a sort of, although he was possibly middle class in inverted commas, that he was very much peasant-like, during his ministry.
And how do you think? Why do you think they moved from making him like before the Good Shepherd to this? Do you see what do you think they're trying to communicate to us that are looking at this image about Jesus? What do you think this image is trying to tell us about Jesus?
Well, again, he's a god rather than, or he's part of God rather than, semi-human but divine, rather than a sort of everyday person. But I'm never quite sure what I think about these very early representations.
Thank you very much. And is there anyone else that would like to say why they think that they are depicting Jesus in this way, in this picture? What the author or the painter wanted to tell us?
It's me again. It's Carol.
Yes.
I've noticed the this sort of halo thing, and so they're trying to make him look rather more saintly and heavenly, and the beard and everything. So the philosopher side, the teacher side, and they've also got the Alpha and Omega thing printed on it as well, haven't they? So anyway, yeah.
Yes.
So they're the differences I notice anyway.
So Alpha and Omega, of course, is a reference to, it's a reference to the, Alpha and Omega is a reference to the book of the Apocalypse. And this book is an important book, as you many know, the book of Revelation, in which Christ says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. That is the first and the last letter of the alphabet and the beginning of the end. And another characteristic is that Jesus looks exactly as you would have imagined. On the street in antiquity, there were a lot of weird philosophers walking around and trying for money to convince young men to learn from them about how to be wise. And the way that if you walked on the street, they would have had this look, especially the Platonists, but many others would have had exactly this look. The kind of clothing is of an upper class educated man, and then the beard and the long hair that would have shown wisdom, teaching, moral seriousness. So what they are trying to say is Jesus is exactly what you think was a wise man. He came to teach to us. So if the one before was to say Jesus is like your savior God, like Adonis, like those gods that you worship that save you, this one is telling you Jesus is the wise teacher. What he wants to point about Jesus is that he's the wise teacher. And as Carol noted, there are imposed also other aspects like Alpha and Omega. So referring again to scripture, like the figure before, and the halo divinity. So what we can say is that both pictures have two objectives. The first one is a reference, making a reference to something in the contemporary culture that people could see in the image. In the first one, the good shepherd looking like a young boy, and here the wise philosopher. And the second one is referencing to scripture. In the first one, the story of the good shepherd, and here Revelation. So these are the two objectives of the early Christians. The reason why they want to make a reference to contemporary culture is, of course, because very much like us, they lived in a world that for the majority wasn't made of Christians. And so when they tried to talk with someone else around them, they had to talk with people that didn't know anything about Christianity, wouldn't have got the reference of Alpha and Omega, wouldn't have got the reference to the Good Shepherd, but they would have got that Jesus was a teacher, that Jesus was wise, and that Jesus was a young savior. So a double language, if you want, worldly language and theological language side by side. So I will leave a few seconds for someone if you want to say something more about these figures that you think about, that you thought about, and that we haven't discussed. Otherwise, I will move to the next one. Is anyone wanting to intervene? Brilliant. So third figure, we go to the oldest possible Jesus that you can see in Dura Europos in the Middle East, in Syria, if I'm correct. And this is again a biblical story, the healing of the paralytic. The paralytic is the man with the bed that Jesus said, take your bed and stand up. And he's doing that. You can see the bed there. And you can see Jesus up there. No beard, short hair, and dressed like a Roman senator. What do you think, given what we said before, they're trying to do here? Anyone?
Hello?
Yes, Margaret.
It's an image of power and authority, isn't it?
Yes, brilliant. Would you like to say more?
Well, power and authority over whatever's kept the man paralyzed. Because
Yes.
the story is that he started with saying your sins are forgiven, which is actually only God can forgive sins. So that upset people to start with. And then he said, well, if that's too difficult, then get up and walk. And he did. So
that's
so
brilliant.
he was exercising authority over, well, demonic forces, really.
Authority over demonic forces. So what you are saying is that by making Jesus look like a secular authority, like a Roman senator, they are saying they are sort of trying to say, look, he's like the senators, but about the spiritual world.
Yes, that's the idea.
That's very good. Yes. So again, like the figures of before, as Margaret pointed out, they are trying to give, through the secular language that everyone can understand, the meaning of what Jesus is to people that are not Christians. So you can see that the art of this period is projected into bringing people in, convincing people, showing people what Christianity is about. Brilliant. So I move to the next one that is very similar in what they're trying to do. This is from 500 AD. It's from Ravenna, that for a brief period was the capital of the Western Roman Empire. And you can see how Jesus here is depicted exactly how Roman emperor of the time would have looked like. Again, power and authority, as Margaret said. What can someone tell me what Jesus says under his feet? Anyone?
The snake and the lion.
Snake and the lion, and what do they represent? Do you have an idea?
Well, the snake is Satan.
Yes.
And the Lion of Judah, isn't
And
it?
the Lion of Judah. Yeah.
Yes. So he may represent Judah, but also what does the lion represent to us if we think of a lion more simply?
Scary.
Vulnerable.
Yeah, something threatening, wilderness.
Yeah.
So a foreign strength, something like that, outside of the human world. And so what Jesus here is doing is subduing the spiritual evil, Satan, the snake, and on the other side, the worldly evil. Because if you had been, I can assure you that if you had been a person in 500 AD in Ravenna, you would have been quite scared, not just of spiritual evils, but also of constant sieges and kidnapping and killings and all sorts of things, as the Roman Empire wasn't at its best period at the time. So Jesus is described and dressed as a military leader, as a military emperor, ruling and saying, I submit but spiritual evil and physical evils. I am the emperor. I defend the empire. So you can see how, again, secular language redeployed to convey spiritual truths. Do you think this is legitimate? Do you think that what ancient Christians did in the first 5 centuries, we have seen these different images, is good, is okay, or do you think it isn't? Anyone would like to say?
Could you translate the Greek or the Latin and the book? Could you translate
I am the way.
Francis?
Yes, in Latin is written ego sum via veri tacet vita. I am the way, the truth, and the life. The said by a military leader is but a threat, I think, if you don't follow him, as defending. You see, he's crushing the 2 enemies that stop you to go in the valley behind him, protected and safe behind the mountains.
Yeah. And the cross, of course, is prognostication, isn't it? I mean, it's pointing forward to Christ is telling us already what is going to become of him, I think.
Yes.
Probably. In the end, I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Yes.
Wasn't wasn't
Yeah.
Ravenna that was a hotbed of one of the major heresies? I can't remember
Yes.
which one it was.
Arianism.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Because I
Yes.
know there's a lot of stuff in Ravenna which they've painted over or destroyed or removed
Yes.
because it wasn't Orthodox Christianity.
Yes. So that's a point that is interesting. Of course, art changed over time based on the kind of what was considered orthodoxy from period to period, because of course Arianism, that we now consider a major heresy, was the dominant form of Christianity in the Roman Empire for some 100 years. But at any rate, at the time that this was made, Arianism had already been defeated. This has probably been made after Emperor Justinian, the most orthodox of emperors, conquered again Italy back from the Longobards by invading from the south, led by Belisarius, thus securing Italy as part of the Roman Empire, led by Constantinople for another 50 years, because unfortunately, the very moment that he has defeated the Goths, the Longobards invade. So then very, very small parts of Italy will remain under Roman rule or Greek rule, because they spoke Greek at this point, for another few hundred years, mainly Sicily, Calabria, Ravenna, Rome, and Puglia. But that's another matter. So Roger, so very well these images and what they represent. So I would like you just to keep in your mind, and then we'll go back to this question. Is it legitimate to try to convey what Christianity is through images? And another question that I ask you just to note, the skin color of Jesus doesn't matter at all. Like, Jesus looks maybe white, maybe a person that had taken the sun. It just looks as a person that you may meet in Israel, Greece, Italy nowadays, or anywhere else. And part of the debate that the Archbishop initiated was about that Jesus wasn't white. So because these were things of the same time as Jesus, or the same kind of cultural milieu, when we say that Jesus wasn't white, are we projecting on antiquity our own categories? So what are the races or the types of people? That's a question that we may go back later, but I would like to leave it in the background as we sort of depart from antiquity and we move up to the Renaissance. Here is Michelangelo's Jesus. I've wrote Christ as Apollo. There was the god of the sun. Why do you think I've wrote Christ as Apollo? Does anyone would like to say or to try and answer?
Apollo was a supreme god, and here is Jesus as a supreme god.
Yes, but what do you think of this, of the way that he looks in this painting? Do you think that he looks
very muscly?
Yes, that's a very good point. Was that Heather?
Yeah, I mean, he
yes, he's very muscly, very well.
Very muscly and strong.
Yeah, are we usually in the habit of seeing Jesus as so naked?
Only on the cross.
Very well, but he doesn't look very much on the cross in this painting.
It's almost as though we've gone backwards, because he looks very, that's an ideal Grecian figure. Or
yes.
so statuesque, isn't he?
Yes, he looks like
perfect image. Jesus didn't look like that at all.
Well, it looks like he spent more time in the gym than preaching.
Yes,
for sure. and eating a calf a day rather than fasting. But yes, the hair, you may notice, are red. The hair are red not because of what we may think they wanted to depict him white, but because red hair were associated since antiquity with the Jews. The reason why they were associated with the Jews is because in the Old Testament, King David is described as Rufus, that means red. In antiquity, people thought that meant that he was red-haired, and so they always depicted him with red hair. But other scholars, more contemporary, think no, it's because he was constantly under the sun, so his skin was red. Either way, when you see Jesus is with red hair, what they're trying to do is simply to say Jesus was a Jew. So he came from the Jewish world. However, in this case, Michelangelo is copying the way that the Greeks made their own gods, like the god Apollo, the god of the sun. And so they made him red-haired because the Greeks used that kind of paint to make the color of the hair of the gods. So really, Jesus looks like a pagan god in this work. And this shows the spirit of the Renaissance, that is the period of time of Michelangelo, that was about the rediscovery of the ways of doing art and culture in antiquity in a more modern period. Do you like this kind of painting? What do you think?
No, not particularly.
Why?
Well, it's just, I suppose, Michelangelo depicted Christ as he sort of thought about him, but I certainly don't think about him in any sense in this fashion.
Anyone else? What does it make you think, this figure of Christ? Are you comfortable with it? Do you like it? You don't like it?
I like the face. I think the face where he's pronouncing judgment, but it's not in any kind of revenge or anger. It's just saying this is what you've chosen. But I think he rather, Michelangelo rather enjoyed painting that body rather too much, I think. It's interesting that the scar from the spear is there, but you have to really look for it.
Yes, that's a very good point. So it's true that he's depicting him as a pagan god, but at the same time, there is still something that reminds us of the fleshy life of Jesus, of his pain on the cross. So this is a depiction. Again, what they're trying to do is not to, what Michelangelo's trying to do is not saying this is how probably Christ would have looked like, but through this way of depicting Christ, they want to communicate some theological truths about Christ. Some is about his face, as Margaret said, he's not angry. Some is about, Heather noticed, his muscly body, that it points us to a perfect God. And some of it is about referring to antiquity, rediscovering it, and saying the religions of antiquity are fulfilled in Christianity. So this was the take of Michelangelo. And now we move back in time, 6th century. If you go in the desert in Egypt, close to Mount Sinai, there is a place that is a monastery of St. Catherine, and you will find this painting of Jesus from the 6th century AD. What do you think of it? I need a volunteer because this figure is very peculiar, isn't it?
I think it's interesting that he's holding a book. He's holding scripture, isn't he?
Yes.
And blessing. The hand is a blessing, isn't it? It's a very sort of.
Do you like it?
I don't know. Yeah, I think so. I think I do like it in a way. But,
there's something peculiar about his eyes.
there is. One's bigger than the other, I think. But something is a bit strange. But yeah.
The reason for that.
Sorry,
please.
I was going to say, I was told the reason for that. You see that a lot in icons, and it's to show the two natures, human and divine.
Yes. So one part of the face of Jesus that looks more normal is to remember us that Jesus was a human being like us, but the other side, it looks more divine, weird, not fully human, and that's the divine side. So in this case, they are trying to tell us with a painting the theological beliefs that Christians have, the belief that Christians have, that Jesus was both human and divine, two natures in one person. What do you think of this way of conveying things? Do you think that goes above the head of onlookers, or do you think that is a good way to communicate theological truths?
Well, it was above my head, so I didn't understand it.
There's isn't there a spirituality where you're encouraged to say not this either, not this either, and I think a painting like this actually encourages you to say that rather than something that might look like Joe down the road. That
yes.
You might, Jesus is Joe down the road.
Yes, it's negative theology. You just look at it and you realize that Jesus wouldn't be a human being, wouldn't be a God, but would be both at the same time. And I guess, however, what they wanted us to do with this is, and that's why it's in a monastery, I think, if you just pray looking in the eyes of Jesus like that, always repeating the words of the Orthodox prayer, part of spirituality, and that are very good for prayer. I found them very useful for myself, saying, Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, and repeating that over and over and over, no more, looking at those eyes, created in those that were living in a monastery and live in a monastery, looking at the image, a sort of sense of going beyond the reality of this world. So if you pray with an icon, you may try it and then let us know how it went.
Yes.
Sean, were you speaking? No. Who said yes?
Carry on, what were you
Okay.
saying?
Let's move on. So here we move back in time after Michelangelo. The Reformation has happened. Christians have broken in wars and fights and all sorts of things. We are, I didn't put it there, in 1710, 1720, and Rembrandt, a non-denominational Protestant but very pious, paints this painting that is considered very much representative of Protestant art. As you can see, it's the Supper of at Emmaus. The reason why it's considered Protestant art is because it's very different from the way that you saw Michelangelo representing Jesus. That was how many Catholics would have represented him. Catholics would have represented Jesus either as Michelangelo did, or they would have gone for presenting him on the altar, on the cross, surrounded by priests and by bishops, everyone praying and preparing communion. However, here you can see a very simple meal, a very subdued meal. Jesus seems lost in contemplation. The prayer of the heart is breaking normal bread. There is just a small white tablecloth in front of him. And people around him are dressed the way in which people would have been dressed at the time of the making of the temple. They look in a normal house. What Rembrandt is saying is that Jesus lived a simple life. The communion is a simple act of sharing among those that recognize in Christ the face of God. And this very simplicity, this light into the darkness, this breaking of the bread, is at the heart of what a person like Rembrandt would have thought was at the heart of the Protestant Reformation. What do you think of this way of explaining some elements of Protestant thought through art, through painting? Do you think it works?
I think that it shows that Jesus is accessible to ordinary people in an ordinary situation, rather than being, being it's the man rather than the God, and he's there for everybody.
That's a lovely thought. There for everybody. Is there anyone else that would like to say what this painting conveys to them? So Carol said for her, it's been there for everybody.
May I say, I think I feel drawn into the picture, and I think Rembrandt wants to draw us in. We would really like to be sitting around the table. We have, to use the current word, empathy with the figure of Jesus, whereas the more classical images and those others we've seen, Jesus is seen as a more distant figure, as a god or as a philosopher. But here we've got a friend who's having a meal with us, and we want to hear what he's got to say.
A friend that is having a meal with us. That's very beautiful, and I think there is some truth. And as you said, it's drawing us in. I think he's also pointing that Protestantism wants to be a religion of the heart, in which Jesus is a friend you talk with in your private, rather than a more ceremonially oriented religion. Anyone else?
I just looking at it. It looks as though it's at the moment when the two disciples realise that it is Jesus. They both look a little bit taken aback in a way, particularly the woman on one side. I don't know what side that is called. The left. You know, the
Yes.
just her face. I think, yeah, they both feel. You can sort of sense their amazement, really.
I think that's very true. So, unless anyone else would like to join in saying what this painting is making them think or reflect, I will leave you a few seconds, and then I will move to the next picture. Very well. We say goodbye to the Sabbath Emmaus, and we meet Jesus in his childhood. So this is one of my favorite paintings by a British artist. It's by Millais. You may find it in Tate Britain, on the embankment just on the other side of the river from Vauxhall. And this painting, he shows the little Jesus in his house, and it has a lot of symbols. And in the recent debates that there have been about race, some people have pointed at this to show that we have a white supremacist view of Jesus.
Hello. Just give me a slight technical hitch. Let's hope Francesco comes back to us in just a moment. Well, just while we're waiting for Francesco to log back in, or to hit his iPad against a wall or something, can everybody still see the image of the Millet
Yes,
painting on
absolutely.
their screens? Good. So to explore this, I know Francesco was planning to talk about the image of Jesus, and I know roughly what he was planning to say. So if he doesn't reappear, possibly I can give you a little bit of a taste of what he'd have mentioned. But just for myself, looking at the painting, there are so many different layers of perspective here, and so many different details of background. I wonder if anything in particular leaps out of you, of the picture to you. I suppose for me, the image of Joseph the carpenter, and particularly his age, and particularly his hands and their roughness and almost shocking redness, just kind of pops out of the center of the picture. He's such an amazingly marginal figure for lots of Christians in terms of our understanding of biblical faith and our understandings of biblical stories, because he disappears from the Gospels so soon after the birth narratives. And yet here he's very front and center, and he seems to be combining the image of him as a carpenter and a worker with him as a protector of the child. Francesco is coming back in now, so hopefully we'll be able to hear Francesco in just a moment.
For some reason, my connection disappeared. Maybe it's because Alec joined. I don't know. I will give the default to him.
So, Francesco, I was just saying that the image of Joseph really stands out for me. Possibly, yes. If you could
share the screen again. Yeah.
You could share the screen again and then talk, because I didn't say what I know you're going to bring out of the picture.
Yes.
Maybe you could talk about that a little.
So
I'll
Alex,
just enable you as a co-host. Yeah.
Brilliant.
You should be able to share now.
Okay. Screen. Zoom. So can you see it?
Yes.
Brilliant. So I was saying, Joseph quite stands out. He looks like a man that you may have met in the slums at the time. He doesn't look at all godly or divine or saint. He looks just a normal father. Jesus has a cut in his hand. That is because he just cut himself learning to work with his father, but also it is showing of the sign of the cross, a foretelling that will come to him. On the other side, you can see another boy, that's his cousin, John the Baptist. He's carrying water to help Mary to disinfect, that's a big word, to care for Jesus as he's cut himself. And he is doing that, looking at Jesus ominously. Of course, as we all know, John the Baptist was a prophet. So I think Millais wants us to see him as having a foretelling vision that makes him realize that that cut in the hand of Jesus is not the first cut that he will have in his hand, neither it will be the worst. On the back, we saw Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist. And then at the very back, we see a lot of sheep, and that's us. You know, these foretellings, Miller puts the sheep to represent all of us, all the flock of humanity, on looking inside to what's happening within in a normal scene of life, because the whole of universe is actually in the little boy at the center of the picture. So these are the main elements. The fact that the way that the figures look is very subversive, the hair color, the skinniness, the way in which their bodies look like, very much like normal people, and also all this symbolic foretelling. So we began by saying the Romans were realists and the Greeks were idealists. here we have the symbolism of the Greeks coming together with the realism of the Romans in one depiction of Jesus. And I wonder, Alex said that he finds very striking Joseph. What do you find very striking in this picture? What do you like? What do you think about it?
Well, it's can you hear me or?
Yes.
Or not?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think it's entitled Christ in the Carpenter's Shop. I'm pretty sure that's the title of it, and it's a pre-Raphaelite picture by John Everett Millais, and it's absolutely fabulous pre-Raphaelite picture with all the detail and color, and the people look really just like you and me and our children. And I think it's splendid from that point of view. The figure of is it Mary? Is it Mary?
Next to him, kissing.
Yeah.
That's Mary. Yes.
I would think so. It's just stunning, and the way the dresses are painted in such detail, and it gets human flesh completely the right color as well. But that doesn't say anything much about the interpretation of the picture. I'm just enjoying it. It's the best one we've had so far this afternoon.
What do you think of the outrage? What all of you think of the outrage of Dickens? So that Mary looks like the alcoholic wife of someone in a slum, and that Jesus looks like emaciated Jew boy. What do you think about Dickens' comments on this picture? Do you see what he means, or do you think that nowadays we see this picture in a completely different way?
I think, it's Carol here. I think that Jesus looks very sort of rather like a weakling boy, actually. John the Baptist looks a far more rugged chap, and so he looks a little. I think Jesus looks a little pampered there, which
yes,
I find a bit. Well, I don't know whether they fussed over him too much. I also wonder, is there a mark on his foot as well?
Yes,
on his hand. I think there's one on his foot as well. I think.
Yes. Very well spotted. It's again another sign of what will happen in the future.
Yes.
Anyone else?
So get on first looking at the picture, as it jumped to this one from the previous illustrations we have seen, it took me back immediately to the style of art that was used in children's books when I was young, so quite a long while ago now. And at that stage, we wouldn't have been able to see all the meanings to everything, but it was just the style, and the lightness and brightness of it is much more inviting than some of the darker images we've been looking at.
Yes, that's because the pre-Raphaelites, albeit they nowadays are not very popular among artists or critics, had a very lasting influence on illustration and the world of illustration. So fairy tales and books were frequently depicted in a way that tried to emulate or was inspired by the way of painting of Millais and the other artists like him. They were part of a group that was called the Brotherhood of the Pre-Raphaelites. So you're very well spotted that little detail. Yes, it's very inviting, the brightness, isn't it? So I will leave a few seconds for anyone to make a comment, and otherwise I will move to the next picture. There we are. Next picture. Jesus is even smaller. So We are moving in time, but in terms of the life of Jesus, we soon will see him as an embryo. Maybe one of you is worried. But here is Mary and Jesus. This is a popular image among Christians in Japan, especially Anglicans. They are not many. They, I think, counted in the tens of thousands. But this is a way in which they are appropriating of Jesus in their own culture and making Jesus look very Japanese. And at the same time, as we have seen that the Greeks and the Romans did, and then later on others, they are using imagery and symbolism of their own culture to say something about the story of the gospel. So here Mary is dressed like a maiden of the temple. The Japanese worship in a polytheistic, or at least outwardly polytheistic religion, in which there are thousands of gods, each one of them as a shrine. And in the various shrine, girls in between 14 and 16 usually serve in the temple for the major festivals, a bit like in many Catholic churches, but also in the Anglican Church, many boys and girls serve at the altar for a period when they are doing catechism. So similarly, girls do that. And when they do that, they dressed in white and red. That originally was a sign of maidenhood and virginity. So what they're trying to say is Mary was a maiden and a virgin, and yet she was a mother. This is what any Japanese person would think looking at this picture. So again, they're doing that thing that we spoke about before. I would like to hear your opinions. What do you think of this Japanese depiction of the mother and the child?
Well, as you say, it's an illustration in their particular culture, and that's entirely understandable. And I think, you know, we all have a tendency to think in terms of our culture, and cultures vary.
And do you find it a positive way of trying to bring the story of the gospel to in our own world, to try and depict it with symbols and appearances that we can all recognize?
Well, I mean, there are many pictures, aren't there, of Mary and Jesus in various forms, and you know, I don't know any one of them has any greater validity than any other.
Yes. But there are certain that surely for taste, sometimes we can say. But that's a very good point.
Fine, but I mean, who am I to judge someone else's taste? And
that's a very good point.
And you know, I have to say, when it first came on the screen, without sort of looking at it at all, I thought, oh, it's a Christmas card, which is an interesting thought. But no, I mean, I think, as I say, people express their feelings about the subject, and we all have different feelings about a range of subjects. So, you know, I don't think there's anything right or, you know, not particularly right, not particularly wrong. It's just a valid representation for the Japanese.
Thank you, Roger. Is there anyone else that would like to say what they think or feel looking at this picture? What kind of thoughts, given what I said, makes them wonder?
Just to, well, not, yes, it is related to this picture, but some years ago, I was involved in teaching a group of Caribbean people to read. And it was one Christmas, I went and found, I was really delighted to find it. There was a packet of cards with a black angel on it. No, a normal looking angel, only black. And I gave them these cards and they were so thrilled. No one's ever shown us a picture of an angel that's black before. And it's just really important that all races are represented, because why not have black angels? Why not have Chinese or Japanese angels? There are African and Asian saints who should be depicted as that and sometimes are.
Indeed. Thank you, Margaret. Anyone else? Okay, I welcome this silence as an invitation to move on. And I go to the next picture. And this is the last picture in this tour de force through almost 2 millennia of Christian representation of Jesus. And this is now in St. Albans Cathedral. Wordsworth is a portraiture artist that has been commissioned to make this altarpiece, and is the Last Supper. I just focused on this detail that is about Jesus and the Apostle John, the beloved disciple that leaned with his head on his chest, as in the Gospel of John is said to have done at the Last Supper. And Jesus is depicted as black, and more than that, he apparently was inspired by some pictures of images of refugees or migrants that have come to the United Kingdom. And as Wordsworth wanted also to provoke by certain Christian audiences by depicting John very much as what you might imagine could be a loving partner of Jesus. So she said in an interview. So there is a double subversion of expectations. The second one is maybe less, because John was always depicted as a sort of youth in history of art, but Jesus in this way is not very common in Western countries, albeit there are many representations like this, or at least of Jesus as black, of course, in the United States, where there is an historically well-established black community for many centuries, and also in many African countries. So this is the last painting I wanted to share, to show how art is speaking within the contemporary debate about the way to paint Jesus. And a last thing that I would say about this painting is that besides being subversive, it also brings the image of Jesus to a very modern debate about how Jesus would have looked like, and about race. Was Jesus white? Was Jesus not white? That, as we have seen in the earlier paintings, wasn't at all belonging to the world that Jesus inhabited, in which race is not a particularly, and wasn't a particularly important thing as such. And even nowadays, speaking as someone that comes from the Mediterranean, I can make the point that the main divisor between people is not so much as they look. As you have noticed, I look pretty fair, but one of my best friends looks as if he's Arab, and yet we're butter Sicilian for many generations on all sides of our parents. The main divisor is religious, that is not good, but essentially people see in between Muslim and Christian rather than white or black or Middle Eastern. That doesn't mean anything to anyone that lives in the region of the Mediterranean or the Middle East. So it's interesting how a British debate is translated, and American is translated in art in this painting. And what do you think about it? Do you like it, or do you think that is not of your taste? Do you think that is an important piece of public conversation? What are your opinions about this painting? Which kind of emotions evokes in you?
Did you? Sorry.
I think we're Carol and Roger. Carol, would you like to speak? I think you started first, and then we will go back to Roger.
All right, thank you. I just think that the expression on Jesus's face is quite remarkable, really. I think it's as though he's saying, these are the people I love. And that love is for everyone. And
Yes.
I think
yeah.
there's also that sense of that understanding of suffering in his face, especially as you mentioned, Francesco, that it was they used refugees as models, perhaps. Yeah, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's very powerful. Yeah.
Yes, he's looking at definitely to us rather than to
yeah.
people in the room outside of the painting.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's as though he's saying, "Love these people for me." Yeah, you know. That's what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carol. And Roger, were you saying?
I was only going to ask, did you say that this is part of a picture of the Last Supper?
Yes. So it's a huge painting. I wanted just to focus on this bit, but you can easily find it on Google, on the website of St. Albans Cathedral, or the website of Wordsworth, that is the painter of this work. On her website, you may find it as the first thing, and is a Last Supper scene, and John the Apostle is leaning with his head on the chest of Jesus, and Jesus is looking at us. So it's a sort of reimagining of the famous Last Supper of Leonardo.
Yes, I think I would like to see the whole picture, because really to come to a conclusion about it. It's knowing that this is part of it, I just feel I want to see the whole.
Yes. I unfortunately I don't have it in the presentation. I can see if I can put it up by searching. In the meantime, is there anyone else that would like to say what they think about this image?
Francesco, can I just say that the whole image was available in the last image of the Herald?
Oh, brilliant. So Roger, on the Herald.
Right. Thank you.
Could I just say, I agree very much with Carol. I think one is drawn into the emotions and all that is on the face of Jesus. And it seems to me that it's very much, I've given my life for you. What are you going to do for me, for other people? How are you going to share what I've come into the world for? It's very, I think it's a very powerful picture, and one that demands a lot of very careful thought, I think.
Thank you. Is anyone else that would like to say anything about this picture?
I took a picture of it when I was at St. Albans.
Did you enjoy it?
Yes, I did. The only thing that struck me was that Jesus was the only black man. All the disciples were white, and I thought, why? Why not depict some of the disciples as white or Asian?
Yes, I guess that the attempt was to speak into the contemporary debate. So I think that Wordsworth has a view that in Britain, black people are considered as inferior to white people, and therefore she has put the savior, the teacher, the master as a black person that you may meet in the street of London begging sometimes, and then surrounded by white, British-looking or Western-looking apostles, and therefore as people in need of salvation, and disciples, people in need of learning. So I think she wanted to put the person, the race that she thinks is usually submitted or last, on top of how I imagined religious hierarchies, I think.
And of course, they abandoned him. And of course, they abandoned him, didn't they? They denied, abandoned him that same night. So, yes, thank you.
Yes, having looked up that picture, thank you for reminding me, Alec. And seeing particularly Jesus' right arm, which obviously, and how embracing he is of everyone who is present there. And that sort of puts a slightly different angle on the picture for me compared with the part that's shown on the screen. But, so it's No, I doubt if that will show up very well for everyone else. But is that...
then thank you for making the point. And everyone is invited to look for the back catalogue of the Herald. That is a very fine publication that deserves very accurate reading frequently and repeatedly. Anyone else would like to speak on this? Otherwise, I would go back to what we have said in general and do a fast skimming of the different images. And then I will ask you if you have a favorite one, or what do you come out of this trying to see Jesus as the other like us or different from us? Very well. So Jesus as the other, a journey images. We have seen many different images. We started by the earliest depictions of Jesus. Here we have him as the Good Shepherd, an image that depicts him as a young God in many ways, but also as a young shepherd of the time, that speaks to the people of the time, and that tells us also a story of the gospel. Here we see Jesus as the philosopher, as a teacher, as a wise man, dressed as a senator. What I want to say to the onlookers is, look, Christ was a wise man and a teacher, not only God. Speaks both to the educated person that knows about Revelation and the person that doesn't know anything about Christianity, but that will be informed by looking at this, that Jesus was a person of wisdom. Then here we have the earliest image of Jesus, the healing of the paralytic. Jesus depicted as a senator, higher up, as the senator rules upon men, this picture says. So Jesus rules upon the demonic powers of illness and heals the paralytic. Again, Jesus is a man of authority, even for those who do not know about Scripture, and that seeing the image may very well have asked to someone else to explain who was the bizarre chap with a bed on his shoulder. Here, Jesus now as the God of the Roman Empire, very much in power. I am the way, the truth, and the life, crushing both the power of this world, the lion, and the power of the spiritual world, Satan, protecting the way, dressed as a Roman emperor, embodying authority and power at a time of uncertainty in which the Roman Empire was collapsing and in great difficulty. This image tells that Christ is on the side of Rome and is not scared to put on an armor to defend it. Here we move away, we go to the Renaissance, we have Michelangelo. Michelangelo depicts Jesus as a god, as Apollo, the god of the sun, a classical figure, muscles in sight, as Eda reminded us, and very much looking like a god in power and judgment, influenced by classical depictions of how God should look like, but at the same time, as Carol said, with a face that doesn't show passion, so as Jesus is judging others, but because they have chosen their own path, and not because he is a vengeful God. We move on to a theology in images, back in time to St. Catherine's Monastery. If on the west we see Jesus represented as an Apollo, pagan god, in the east, we are dominated by theology. We see Jesus, half of his face with a big eye as God, the other half as man, protecting Christian orthodoxy by holding the Bible and doing a blessing that you would see a priest or a bishop doing. And so inviting us to think about the church and see ourselves as church members. And then to the Reformation. This, I think, is the image that have to be, in, together with Wordsworth, the most popular. Many of you have said many nice things about this image. He's inviting us inside. Jesus is not the God of the communion table, high up with 6 candles and a lot of worship investments, like at the time of the Reformations, many Jesuses would have depicted. No, the Protestant Rembrandt depicts Jesus as one like us, as a friend, in a simple table with a simple cloth, breaking normal bread, a light in the darkness to invite us in a private conversation of the heart. And then here, an image much commented by many of you, Jesus in wide, bright colors, as a child, representing all his life in a scene of family life, and Mary and Jesus in a subversive way, represented as common people. Here we went in cultural depictions of Jesus, Mary as a maid of the temple, and Jesus in her arms, a popular image in Japan that reminds us that as much as we depict Jesus as different, we also depict him like us, because reminds us that he wasn't just a God up there or out there, but also someone that looked very much like us and put on our flesh. Opposite to that, Jesus as the other, as perceived by a country that is mostly white and in which Black people are mostly not in position of power if they just migrated in the country. And so you see a migrant to Britain depicted as Jesus and a white apostle looking up to him. Again, Jesus as the other different from us, the one that we usually ignore and do not respect. So two theologies, the Japanese one, Jesus like us, and this one, Jesus as different. So this was the presentation, and here I conclude. If you would like to say something or go back to a picture, you're invited to do so. Otherwise, I will pass the conversation to Alec to move us forward. Anyone?
It's been a very powerful afternoon, and thank you very much. A lot of things to think about, and I'm grateful. Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. And if any of you would like to have the names of the pictures or images, just pop an email either to me or to the parish office, and then I will try and turn them around, if that's okay with Margaret.
Yes, that's fine, and thank you.
So I'm stopping to broadcast from my screen, Alec, if that's all right.
Yes, go ahead, Francesco. And while you're turning off screen sharing, let me add my thanks. I'm sorry I wasn't here for the whole meeting because I had a parallel meeting. But what I saw was fantastically broad and gave a really fascinating survey of all those different aspects of the way we think about images of Christ. And of course, how we see ourselves or don't see ourselves in some of them as familiar and as alien, and therefore how we're inspired to see other people better embodied by his iconography of humanity at its most complete. I hope that lots of you, having enjoyed today, will also be tuning in, same time, probably the same place in your living rooms, I imagine, next week at 2:30 on Wednesday, when I'll be leading the final session in our Art and Faith Opportunity to Learn Together. And I'll be talking about images of creation and chaos, and using some lovely woodcut images, very simple in terms of colour but detailed in terms of craftsmanship, to explore ideas of light and darkness and what comes forth when they meet, and what comes forth when we as Christians are the point where light and darkness meet. So it's lovely to have seen you all on a very small screen, and I hope to see you all again this time, well, slightly earlier than this, next week at 2:30 on Wednesday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all, everybody. And,
lovely,
we'll
and thank you all for your patience.